Story 1. One of my neighbors was a creepy guy. He was seen often walking and talking alone on the streets in the middle of the night, and I cannot believe this was real, carrying a machete with him. This guy was crazy. He never felt pain. One time being hit by a car, broke his leg, and he was worried about his cheese and his cowboy hat. Yelled random at things only he could see, and was afraid of his mother in a weird way. He was 40 or something like that. He would do as his mother says, but he wasn't violent. Everyone said his mother made some kind of a deal with the devil because none of them worked but had money, and she sold his soul for this deal. He was in his world, walking and mumbling random things, talking about death and angels. His mother died unexplained 2 years ago. She was fine on the same day after he yelled on the street and someone called the ambulance. She passed on her bed with an expression of fear, and her eyes showed pure shock. He crying uncontrollably, asking who will stop the devil that was coming after him. After they buried his mother, he disappeared without a track. It's kind of hard to not see him because he was a 190, 80 kilos or full muscles guy, but no one has seen him and I'm not sure what to believe. He always scared me but never did something to even approach me. A few times only saying hi because we lived on the same street. Recently, if I understood correctly, someone found his machete in the cemetery, but I don't know if it's true. Also, his house is still empty because it's his property, and I am not sure how the law works because he wasn't declared mentally ill, so he had all the rights on it. From time to time, you can still see a light in the attic, but no movement. I'm really curious about what happened to him and where is he now? I had to call my mother for this one because I didn't know the details. It happened when I was young and not gonna lie. Left a small mark on me, and I am afraid of this respective house. I had an insanely violent neighbor, and he had a small farm with a few cows, pigs, and some chickens. So naturally, he had helpers around the house with his wife. He always loved to terrorize kids, and it was awful because he lived across the street, always being extremely mean with my brother, like picking him up by his ears or grabbing his nose and shutting his mouth all in the middle of the day. There were lots of complaints on his name, but nothing happened until 2015, 2016 when he beat a neighbor after a dispute. He kidnapped him somehow, tied him in a hay pile, beat him for a few hours, and after that left him on the street where was found and taken to the hospital. His wife, blesses her heart, was a sweet lady who will always try to stop him and always blamed the cursed land, referring to their house, which everyone in my city believes is full of demonic stuff because he was a nice guy before moving there. My neighbor, the one who was beaten, dropped the charges. Nobody knows why. He was cruel with his workers and was seen often beating them as well, but usually took people without a family or house so they didn't leave. Around 2017, his workers start to disappear, getting new ones every few weeks, and everyone starts to wonder what was happening until one day when one was found dead a few streets away, and when the police showed up, they found on his property around 8 bodies. It was a short chase, was arrested, in court. His wife declared he is influenced by the house, and the judges declared he is mentally ill, but still have to face charges. From June 2017, he was in prison until last year, when he was out due to some medical condition, I think. His wife never sold the house, just refused to come around, sold all the animals, made a religious funeral for those who were killed by her husband, and moved to a forest close to our city. That house is one of a hell one. You can hear whispers coming from that house, even if no one lives there anymore. One time I tried to look over the fence because I heard lots of noise from there, but didn't see anything. One time someone tried to enter and steal from there. Everything is still there. Even the jewelry and all the furniture and home appliances, all of them high quality, and they just run outside screaming something attacked it. I still talk with the sweet lady from time to time, and she's saying how that house was cursed and is protected by evil things, and soon will need blood. And that's why her husband was doing those crimes. I've seen her husband as well. He looks almost dead because of his illness, but both of them are happy because they escaped from the hell house. Even birds are avoiding this place, and no one ever tried to enter. Sorry for such a long text, but this one was the most interesting. Keep in mind I am skeptical about it. I truly believe the couple got lots of problems, but the house is still creepy, and I am afraid to come home late at night alone because I always feel like someone is watching me. Story 2. I don't live there anymore, but the house next to the one where I grew up had some weird stories about it. It was abandoned and run down, but still had patio furniture in the back of the house, so it looked abandoned in a hurry. Our old neighbor on the other side of our house said she knew the family that used to live there. She told us this story about how one night at around 2 a.m., the family's daughter showed up at her door crying. The daughter was crying about how they had to leave that night and came to say goodbye. My neighbor said she saw them leave carrying garbage bags into their car, trying to take all they can. They left that night and never came back. Maybe a year after hearing this, I and my friend were playing catch in the backyard. He threw the ball over the fence of the creepy house, so I went to go get it, and it was just a normal fence that divided the properties. You could go around it. I went around it and grabbed the football, and I look up at the second floor window, and I swear I saw a woman looking out the window. I ran back to my house as fast as I fucking could. Now looking back on it, the woman was probably just a squatter or maybe just a teenager with her that broke in with her friends looking for a place to smoke. But it still freaked me the fuck out.
Story 3. Over the heath, there was an ancient crumbling waterhouse where the entire estate's water system was managed. Believe me, we thought it was a miracle how anything that old and manky could keep and pump out any water, but it did. It was made with bricks, with a black slate roof and iron doors, although at the time of this incident, it was just a shadow of its former self, and didn't have any doors. The windows were all smashed in by generations of kids throwing rocks and stones at them. It was there where my mama and her siblings were kids played over the heath, and they all told us it. Spooked them and their mates as it did us. It was a really hot day one summer, in the school holidays. The older boys were at home for some reason, and all the younger cousins, me included, were being little brats, so the boys said they would take us all blackberry picking to keep us quiet. Mama agreed gratefully. The boys were responsible and mature at 16, 17, and 18. They babysat for us younger kids all the time, so we all knew the rules of staying close to the boys and doing what they told us. And so, a half hour later, everyone had their fruit buckets and we were off. There were 5 of us younger kids. We were all excited as blackberry picking was a great family favorite activity, and our Gran's blackberry pies were the best. Gran's house led directly onto the back of the heath. There was a fence with a gap at the end. One of my older cousins passed me through to the other, and then lifted my tiny wheelchair over the fence. The other kids were through in seconds, and we were away again. On our way to our destination, the older boys told us spooky stories, as they always did, half because they liked scaring us, and a half because we all used to beg them to. There was nothing more terrifying than a story from my cousins H or B. They were masters, and so believable. We loved it. We all stopped talking when we came to the waterhouse. Nobody ever dared to speak around or near the waterhouse, not even the older boys. For something so mundane, it always looked, and still does, so eerie. There was a second fence to get through before we reached our beloved blackberry field, but this time as we squeezed through the gap of the fence, we were all more somber as we remembered the old wife's tale, urban legend that we all knew about the waterhouse. The story goes, once in the early 1960s, there was a gang of bank robbers. They were local to the area and were nasty pieces of work. Their expertise was terrorizing bank customers and staff alike before grabbing and shooting anything that moved. They did several jobs without getting caught, but they really messed up a particular job, and a sweet 19-year-old trainee bank clerk was shot dead and 5 more people were seriously injured. One of the gang was also shot dead, along with the nastiest member of the gang being seriously wounded in the crossfire. It is said that the remaining gang members escaped with just a few hundred and made their way over to the heath and hid out in the waterhouse. It was newish at that time and was a perfect hideaway for the murderers. There was a lot of contention and stress between the remaining gang, months, although it was never proven how. The bodies of all 3 of the remaining gang members were discovered rotting away in the waterhouse 6 months later, a few years after the weird stuff and creepy noises started occurring near and around the waterhouse. Mysterious, hairy figures were glimpsed moving stealthily amongst the pipes and wires. A dank, moldy, rotten smell like aging riverweeds was always smelt around the area of the waterhouse, and eerie wails and menacing murmurs could be heard day and night. In the late 70s, there was a spate of mysterious deaths of homeless people who would shelter over the heath not too far from the waterhouse. There was nothing to ever link the deaths to the waterhouse, But the locals soon started giving the waterhouse and surrounding area a wide berth because of the creepy history and dark reputation, and that left the waterhouse abandoned and in disrepair. That's what we knew of the waterhouse's dark history. That is why we were so wary and anxious to get away from it as quickly as possible. When we were all through the gap in the fence further away from the waterhouse, we younger cousins built up enough courage to glance over at the building of ill repute, before being rounded up by the older boys. Put me in my wheelchair again, and we set off to the blackberry field. We soon arrived at the field, where some other local kids we knew were already there, and we spent a nice afternoon picking and eating the juicy sweet blackberries and splashing in the river. Soon the sun was getting low, and it was time for home.
Our journey home was much like the one there. We were still bantering, laughing, and the older boys were still winding us up slightly. But being as it was getting later, we were feeling wearier and slightly subdued. When we reached the fence before the waterhouse, the air felt slightly too close, like before a thunderstorm. The youngest of the three older boys got me out of my wheelchair so that B could lift it over the fence. The other kids were already on the other side of the fence with H and B. Suddenly said to his brother in a low-guarded voice, "Something moved at the back of there, bruv." B just looked at him sideways. Out of the boys, A was the most likely one to pull a stunt or wind anyone up for a laugh. But A was straight-faced. A said, "I'm gonna have a look," passing me through to B and squeezing past us all. "Wait up, A. We've got tea." Having put me in my wheelchair, B had moved forward towards his brother when we all heard A shriek out in horror and disgust, and the two boys moved back quickly. H, having already taken me out of my wheelchair again, had told everyone to run, and we did, B picking up my tiny wheelchair, folding it up while running. A grabbing the other two kids' hands and following B and H running with me on his shoulders, holding my other cousin's hands. We ran and ran. A kept saying, "Don't look back. Don't look back." I did, but saw nothing. We didn't stop till we got to the fence which leads back to the road on the estate, and we could see civilization again. We were all completely exhausted, especially the older boys. Before we slipped through the fence to the road, B, holding himself up by the railings, asked, "What did you see, A?" "Yeah, yellow eyes, H, hairy face." All of us younger kids began to panic and scream, and H had to calm us all down. He said that we were safe and it would be all right, but we all wanted to get as far away from the waterhouse as possible. When we got home, we all looked bedraggled and slightly nervy. Mom and my auntie noticed this and asked the boys what was wrong. H just said that we just got spooked by an old drunk man in the bushes looking for golf balls to sell. And as that was quite commonplace over the heath, Mom and my auntie just gave us kids a pep talk and hugged us. We never did tell my mom or my auntie the truth about the yellow eyes and hairy face, or find out what it was, but we kids didn't go near the waterhouse for a long time after. Story 4. In the Western Ghats, Maharashtra, this story starts with a pizza delivery boy who lived on the other side of the Ghat and had to travel to and fro every day for his job. Many times he would have to work till late, like on festivals, holidays, weekends, etc. Once when he was returning home late at night, around 1 a.m., and saw a lady with a baby in her arms standing on the side of the road, he got confused as it was so late and asked if he could help. She said yes, and he dropped her at the end of the Ghat. Remember, the Ghat has almost no lights. This kept happening every time he traveled around that time. One day the same thing repeated, but this time the baby was crying too hard. This particular day he decided to ask the lady what is her problem and why she was there at this time. The baby was crying in the background. She did not answer any of his questions and remained quiet. Then to change the topic, the guy said that the baby is crying a lot. Is it hungry? Is it hurt? This is so annoying and stuff. For some reason, she got so angry that after hearing his comments, she threw the baby down the hill from the road. The guy was too stunned. He started getting scared. He did not know what to do. He told her to get off. He didn't ask a single question. Now he just wanted to leave ASAP. The lady did get off his bike, but as soon as he started to go, she ran furiously behind him. It is said that the next day the guy was nowhere to be found. People did find his bike, but not him. It is also said that the Atma, or soul, of the baby still roams around there, and crying noises can be heard at around that time. Many truck drivers also reported similar cases. Creepy. Story 5. Where I grew up, there was this empty house for sale for what had to have been at least 10, 12 years. Got sold finally and then put up for sale again, like within weeks. This was back in the 80s, 90s. I would ask my stepdad why the house never seemed to be sold or stay sold. It was a nicely maintained outside appearance house. He said, probably asking way too much for it. At the time, I accepted that answer. Then once I was an adult, I started to realize just how odd and impractical that would have been. I mean, I know that happens, but for that long? And then when someone does buy, they immediately sell it again? It didn't add up. So one of the next times I was back in the area visiting, I asked around a little about the house, as it had been torn down at some point. Everyone I asked stated that the house was incredibly haunted, to the point that when anyone would even tour the house to buy it, I guess stuff would happen and people would just leave. Now, what I can recall, there were plenty of times I would drive by that house when I was in HS, and random lights would be turned on in that house. I always assumed that someone either broke in or someone would leave lights on to keep folks from breaking in. No clue what the actual truth is about the house, but I do know that there were never any other stories about anything else in that town being haunted, and that house was maybe built in the late 60s, 70s, so the house wasn't even that old when all of that was going on. So who knows? Story 6, Scottish settlement that imported sheep and persuaded at least 14 families from the old country to undertake an exciting new adventure. They came over in 1804 optimistic about the future, but were soon greeted to find the reality of a swampy piece of land just in time for malaria season. The settlement got off to a rough start. The low-lying swamps were difficult to cultivate, and agricultural output was dismal. Their sheep weren't thriving as they did back home, and soon disease spread. They tried to raise extra funds and fix the problems, but it never worked out. After the colony was invaded by other settlers in 1812, most of the original settlers left, and the founder sold his property. Some original Highlanders remained, and they were soon joined by others who were interested in making the land more usable. However, this was just the beginning of their troubles. The first incident happened to some of the women while they were prepping straw in the barn. Without any warning, the poles from the roof structure started to fall, sending deadly wooden daggers to the ground. The woman had to run to avoid being impaled. They investigated and couldn't find any reason why this happened. Then paranormal events started happening. Unexplained sounds started during the night. They heard footsteps throughout the house. And it wasn't just the occasional creak or soft shuffle. According to many family members, it sounded like the rhythmic marching of men preparing for war. When the family went to investigate, the noises would abruptly stop, and they couldn't see anyone around. While a baby was sitting in a wooden crate, it suddenly started to rock violently from side to side. 3 men rushed over to stop the crate, and although they used every ounce of strength, they could not stop the crate. It was as if it was being forced by an unseen hand. They removed the baby, and the crate continued to rock back and forth when the men backed away in terror. Then fires started. Over 12 fires were put out on the property without any signs of anything starting them. As one fire was put out, another one would pop back up in its place. They were troubled and now certain that something or someone was trying to drive them away from the farmhouses. There are many accounts of these events happening year after year. The most common incident reported were rocks and bullets being propelled at the exterior of their houses. They would collect the rocks and bullets and leave unique markings on them. They were brought off of the property and put in nearby creeks only a few days later. Would the same bullets and rocks with the unique markings come back? These stories started to spread about the property, and curious newspapers began picking up the stories and investigating. Eventually, people started traveling to see the settlement. The families who lived there finally got tired of the constant harassment from unseen forces and now tourism and noisy people. Local folklore experts and some teachers started coming to give them the advice to get rid of their ghost problems. One suggested that they needed to shoot a black goose with a silver bullet because the curse was put on their property by a woman who lived nearby, so they tried it. They were told that this woman originally wanted to purchase the land, but they wouldn't let her because she was a woman, so she had been doing this to get revenge. They performed the ritual with the goose. They took a silver bullet and shot the black goose in the wing. Shortly after, they saw the woman with her arm in a sling. After that, all of the events stopped, and they had peace for many years. One day, the woman who they suspected got passed away. She grew old and passed with her 3 sons by her side. The same day, ironically, the settlement caught fire and burned down.
Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.